Hi guys, and welcome to the third Flip learning session. And in today's session we're going to look at research methods in social psychology and how to analyse quantitative data. You can use your workbooks with this, and you can rewind the video and pause it at any time. So in the last video we looked at collecting data, and by now you should have your own data ready to go. And basically what we're going to do this time round is look at how to represent your data as a table, then how we can use descriptive statistics effectively to analyse our data, and also how we can represent our data as a graph. So now we have collected the data from our questionnaires. We should have 20 questionnaires completed, 10 of which are male and 10 of which are female. What you need to do is look at the Likert items on your scale, in which this example I've got 4, and then you need to score it. Now if we look at each individual Likert item, we can see that a participant or respondent could answer either anywhere between 1 and 5 on each item. Okay, and this will give you a clue as to what their perceived obedience is. So in my questionnaire here I've got 4 items, so a person could score a maximum of 20 on the Likert scale, and they could score a minimum of 4 on the Likert scale. Okay, and that should generally give us an idea of how they perceive themselves to be in terms of obedience. So just before we score our questionnaires, we need to consider one more thing, and that is the items on our questionnaire which are reverse scored. So basically I've double starred these, and what the reverse score item is saying is actually the opposite of what you've initially said. So for instance, underage drinking is acceptable, which is question 3. A person who strongly disagrees with that is likely to be very obedient, and so although they'll have got a lower score on the obedience, you need to reverse score that. So in this example they've got a disagree, which will come up as a score 2, but when you're scoring it you need to give it a 4. And if you've got somebody who's in, for example, number 5, laws are meant to be broken, if they strongly disagree with that statement, what you need to give them is, rather than a 1, you need to give them a 5. So their total obedience score will actually be 19, so it's quite high in terms of perceived obedience. Okay, so now I've actually scored all my questionnaires. What I've done is I've put these into a frequency table, and this shows the obedience rating score, so we're going from 4 to 20, and it shows the frequencies of how many males rated themselves a specific score and how many females rated themselves a specific score. So obviously this is 10 males and 10 females. As you can see from the frequency data, it appears that females rated themselves more highly in terms of perceived obedience than males. Okay, so now we've got our table of results showing frequencies. What we can look at next is descriptive statistics, and we can look at measures of central tendency and measures of dispersion. Measures of central tendency look at typical values, so for instance what could be considered to be the average amount. Measures of dispersion look at how widely the values are spread between the lowest and the highest. And depending on the type of data we've got depends on which measures you're going to use. So for instance, if you're using categorical data, say for instance hair colour, those types of things, where there's a label, you would use mode and range. If it's ordinal data, so for instance what we're doing now in terms of rankings, you would use median and interquartile range. For interval or ratio data, which is where there's equal distances between individual scores on a scale, so things like time and height, and we know there's say equal distance between the seconds and things like that, we would use mean and standard deviation. but for our example we're going to use median and interquartile range because it's ordinal data, and these are explained on the table. Okay, so now we've actually put our data into a table and we've done some descriptive statistics on it. We can actually represent it graphically using a graph. So we might like to use a bar chart if our data is categorical. So for instance, in terms of this example, this is recall of different types of words. So concrete words, which are words you can put a picture to, and abstract words, which are words which you can't. And up the y-axis we've got mean number of words recalled correctly. So in this example we can see very clearly that a higher number of concrete words were recalled than abstract words. This looks very similar to the histogram on the right, but actually there is quite a deal of difference between them, because histograms don't use categorical data, they use continuous data. So for instance, in this example, you've got a scale which is to do with self-esteem, and that scale runs from 15 to 24. And then you've got frequencies, so how many people rated themselves, for instance, on that specific number. And that gives us an idea of frequency, and it gives us an idea of the spread of the data, and we can tell a lot. Okay, for our data related to the perceived obedience questionnaire, what I've actually done is I've put the data into a graph, and as you can see on this graph we've got the frequency and the obedience rating. We've got females as orange and males as blue, and if you look you can see that quite clearly in terms of our data we see that the females have clearly rated themselves higher on these obedience questionnaire questions than the males, which would probably fitting quite well with my hypothesis that I believe that males will perceive themselves to be less obedient than females in certain situations. Okay, before I finish I would like to talk about normal and skewed distribution. So data can be distributed in a number of different ways, and if we've got enough data we can see what that distribution is if it's plotted on a histogram. And there are three different ways in which it can be distributed. So we've got a negative skew, a normal distribution with no skew, and a positive skew. Okay, so we can look at these three distributions in a little more detail. So imagine if we gave people a test. We'll start off with a normal distribution, because in a normal distribution, which is perfectly symmetrical, most people would score around the middle point, which represents the mean, the median, or the mode. Okay? And most people, the frequency would be highest in the middle. To the left of the distribution, you would get people who scored lower on the test, and to the right of the people you would get people who would score higher on the test. So there would be fewer of those people on the extremes. However, with a negatively skewed distribution, it may be different, and the reason for this would be that the test may be easier than people thought, so they got higher marks, or the test may have been given out to more able people, so they got higher marks. So that would skew the distribution negatively. If the test was positively skewed, it could have been a more difficult test to begin with. So that means the results are further down, and so more people get lower results. The way we can think of these and remember these different types of distributions is if it's negatively skewed, we can think of a whale, because it looks a little bit like a whale, going away from home. So if you imagine the y-axis as home, so they're leaving home and they're a bit sad. Okay, so they're negative about it. But then in the positively skewed distribution, that whale is quite happy because he's going home, he's going to his y-axis, so he's getting close to home again, and he's all happy, he's all positive. To summarise, in this video we've looked at representing our data as a table, using descriptive statistics effectively and choosing the right ones to use, and also representing our data graphically to make it more interesting. Please feel free to watch this video again and focus on the main bits which you will need for the workbook activities. In the next video we will be looking at writing up a report and the conventions to writing up a report. And once again, thank you for listening.